Welcome back. How would you like to be 70 years old and look like this, huh? This is a beauty. Yep, this gun is going to be, this model 94 32 Winchester Special is going to be 70 this year. So it's in great shape. It's got some distress marks. I'd like to know the history behind some of these marks, and it probably could tell a million stories. But besides the distress marks, a little bit of thinning of the bluing where it was carried probably for so many years through the woods of New Hampshire and Maine. It's a terrific shooter. It's in great shape. But most importantly, the wood is sound. This wood is absolutely sound and tight. There are no telltale cracks right here, and telltale cracks right there. And you say telltale about what? And there are no fissures and cracks along this side of the tang either. Well, I'll tell you what those tell the tale of. It's abusive oiling of the gun. If there's any one crime that guns are subjected to all the time, it's oiling. And I'm not talking about over-oiling, I'm talking about oiling. When you oil a gun, it obeys gravity. Oil is a fluid that obeys gravity, and it will I don't care which way you stand it, it's always going to find its way to the nearest wood, where the wood will gladly sop it up. The oil that's used, in oiling a gun is not stock oil. That's an entirely different thing. Stock oil is classically linseed oil, typically boiled linseed oil, which is raw linseed oil with drying agents in it so that it doesn't take 3 weeks to dry. It's got some mineral spirits and a few other drying agents in it that are totally toxic. You can't drink this stuff. In its raw form, raw linseed oil is actually flaxseed oil, and flaxseed oil you can buy in a health store. So it's the same thing. The difference is that it's processed in a food plant and not in a paint plant. So you don't go to the hardware store and say, "Hun, I'm saving money on our flaxseed oil, and we're going to drink linseed oil from now on." Don't do that, because it's one is made, like I say, in a sterile food plant factory, and the other is made in a industrial factory. Totally different. But that's the type of oil which is used to preserve gun stocks. That was used at one time to preserve gun stocks. This one here, made in 1944. This is a 30 US M1 carbine. You can see this stock is in fabulous shape, never been refinished or anything. It's just, this is how it came out of the armory. This is a gun that the metal is absolutely, that receiver is immovable. What you hear rattling is the operating rod. This is a sound, absolutely tight stock that has got no cracks in it whatsoever. So gun stocks will last forever. Don't listen to the stupid comments I hear that walnut will eventually compress, and you have to bolster it up with a lot of glass bedding compound. And I'm repeating myself from a recent video when I glass bedded my M1A. Walnut does not compress. What compresses is punky walnut that somebody has abused by oiling their gun. And that seems to be very much in vogue these days. I can guarantee you that my father and grandfather would never have oiled guns. And their guns are still around, just like this one's still around, just like that Model 94 is still around, because they were not oiled. You say, well, how do you preserve guns that aren't oiled? Well, you use what any sensible person would do, is you get a cotton flannel, and this one here happens to be 20 by 20. I get a yard of it at the yard goods store. I like this navy blue. You know, if you want, you can get teddy bears on it or anything you want. I mean, you can get shamrocks on it. But I don't like to have any dyes in it. I mean, I don't like to have any printing because that usually means there's some synthetics in it. It's got to be 100% cotton. Pour in some mineral oil. And when I say mineral oil, go to your drugstore, you know, the apothecary aisle, and get a bottle of this. It's very inexpensive. It's the same exact stuff, as a matter of fact, as it's the same exact stuff. If you look on the bottle, this is mineral oil. They're both exactly the same. This one, you can see the size of it. I paid $4 more for this bottle one day than I paid for this bottle. So figure out the math yourself. So every now and then, just simply apply some oil to this rag, and you can see I put a puddle there, and you can fold it up like this right here and work it in like you're squeezing out a bathing suit. And you do that every now and then with the oil, and it will be sucked up by that flannel. 100% cotton. Just don't get any synthetics, because they can be abrasive. And when you get done with that, you wipe down your gunmetal, and if you've taken apart the gun and you got parts that you're just itching to lubricate, don't lubricate them. This is all the lubrication that you need. This amount of lubrication, you can see the nice sheen on that metal. But that will stay put. If I add oil, if I drizzle oil from a can and put it on there, it's going to drag down, and it's going to end up in the wood. And what I see, I mean, it's a crying shame. What I see with guns in the used aisle are guns where the tangs are split, you know, where the wood has gotten dark and blackened. Especially, it actually travels and migrates all the way to this end of the buttstock. And when it gets down there, you know that wood has been saturated for years and years and years, and somebody just could not help. They just had to, wherever there was a hole, they had to stick a 3-in-1 oil can in and just drizzle it. They thought they were being kind to their gun. The gun was screaming if it could talk. Don't do that to me. There's nothing to oil in a gun. There's nothing to oil in a gun. Read my lips. There's nothing to oil. I'm an armorer. I was factory trained at Ruger, at Smith & Wesson, and at Remington. And I also received a lot of telephonic training from the people at Winchester and other factories. Ruger puts right in their owner's manual, oil destroys guns. The way that I applied the oil with a cloth will not destroy the gun. It's applied to the metal, and it will not run into things that it's not supposed to run into, which is namely the wood. And the other thing that it runs into is it will run into the chamber. And when you get oil in a chamber, you destroy the physical properties of a metallic cartridge firearm, which is to have adhesion between the brass case and the walls of the chamber. And if you don't have adhesion, if you don't have that adhesion at the instant of firing, you're going to have gas leaking back behind the breech. And that's very, very dangerous. And not only is it dangerous, but it causes gas cutting of parts, of bolts, and especially AR-15 bolts. They can be weakened and cracked because of additional bolt thrust. That case is supposed to stick there and not want to go back farther. The case is part of the strength of the gun. And when that case slides, when it's not able to adhere to the chamber of the rifle, that case will slide back and it will press directly against that bolt. And it's called bolt thrust. And when you have bolt thrust, that is not a good thing. The bolt is there to withstand the pressures that is made for, pressures that are designed around a brass cartridge case that retains those gases. But when that brass is not obeying and is sliding against that breech, that's doing something which is that's not part of the measurement that the people took when they designed the gun. So be kind to the wood and be kind to your gun by not oiling it. If you have any places that need to have lubricant, and I explained exactly with my AR-15 video, I explained exactly why I use LSA, because this was developed as a high temperature lubricant for a very specific small area, just the area of the bolt between the rear of the lugs where the gas rings are back to the cam pin. That's all this lubricated with just 1 or 2 drops of this LSA. You shake this up too. This has to be shaken. But that's all that you do with that. That's the only place that you apply that oil, and that will give you all the protection that you need for those friction surfaces. So that's the first part about caring for a gun, is by not actually oiling it, because by oiling it you're going to destroy that wood. The people that ask me what to do to care for a gun stock, that's a good question. It largely has to do with what the stock is made from. In most cases, you don't have to actually do anything actively to a gun stock. You can protect most gun stocks these days. I would say better than 90% of your gun stocks these days are treated with urethane. In other words, it's a sprayed-on finish, 1 or 2 coats of urethane that goes into a drying cabinet, and that's it. And it leaves the factory with that protection on it. In the day of this Model 94, it looks like this was probably spar varnish. In other words, an exterior spar, came from the term of spars on a ship, sailing ship. But spar varnish was used as a waterproof varnish that preserved these stocks. It's just a surface finish that was applied to a stained walnut, and that was eventually that was replaced by urethanes as they became chemically available after their invention. You'll still see some oiled finishes. This Beretta Silver Pigeon has actually an oiled finish. This is I would presume this is probably a linseed oil finish. It's rather discreet. There's not an awful lot. In fact, it's the wood stock has got some. You can see it's got some porosity. I kind of like that myself. In other words, it's not a flat, shiny surface. It's actually got some pores in it, like skin. Just natural wood pores. So I kind of like that. If I were to become industrious and over time, if I were shooting this all the time, your surface, your face gets salted oils onto this and everything, and that needs to be wiped off and protected with more a little bit, just a daub of linseed oil. When I say a daub of linseed oil, that's what I'm talking about right there. I put my finger in the cup, and it's not drizzling down my finger. That's all you do is you take that amount and you wipe it on the stock and you rub it in with the palm of your hand. Get your palm of your hand nice and warm, and just keep working it in. And wherever it dries, you can put just another dot and just work that in, and that will provide all that you need for protection for a rifle that has had a rifle or a shotgun that has had an oil finish applied. And that goes for That goes for the 30 M1 carbine, your standard Walnut M1A or M14. That's all you need to do is occasionally just apply a little bit more boiled linseed oil. And don't use raw linseed oil, because raw linseed oil doesn't have those drying agents in it. And although it's it's safer to use and all that stuff, you're not using that much. You need to have something that actually dries. So if you've got a new gun, I haven't done it to this one yet, but if you've got a new gun, it's a good idea to go inside the barrel channel. I would take out any metal components by removing those screws and taking the metal components away from the wood, and applying just some discrete amount of oil to the inside of those barrel channels, and that will preserve that against water intrusion and give it good protection. Remember, that was the standard application for protecting military firearms. So they've been around for a long time. You can see 1903 Springfields and Enfield rifles that were made for World War I and long before World War I, and their stocks are in beautiful condition because they had just a nice. They were treated by dropping the stalks into a vat of linseed oil, and that saturated the wood and preserved it, and it provided a nice surface finish as well. But it's not a clear surface finish like you'll find with urethanes and varnishes and those things that can be violated and scratched, and then you have a problem with a scratch on the surface, such as with this Model 94. These, it has, I don't know if you can pick those up, but it has some distress marks here. There's one here, and there's another one. There's another one over here. But those distress marks, that's where varnish was actually scraped off. And I'm not going to concern myself with it, because the last thing I want to do is refinish this stock. If you want to ruin the value of any gun, refinish the stock. That's just a no-no. If you have an old beater and you don't, it doesn't have any value anymore, and you want to, dress it up and put a, new finish on the stock, read up about it carefully. Don't read the blogs, because it's full of nonsense. But read some furniture finishing articles on how to do that sort of thing, and do it carefully. And always use a flat sanding block, just a small sanding block, 2 or 3 inches long, a ½ inch thick, maybe an inch wide, wrapped with a strip of 1 inch wide sandpaper, 6 inches long, and use that to carefully sand things down, and don't ever round off any edges that are, meeting other metal surfaces. The classic thing I see, everybody sees, is where, these tang surfaces right here that are nice and sharp, and they're level. The wood and the steel are level. They're now curved over and rounded, and the tang, especially here, the tang no longer reaches the steel receiver. So you look this way, and you're looking at the edge of the receiver where it was machined. So those are all the things that you need to avoid. The best thing to do with a gun stock is nothing. That's the best thing you can do with a gun stock. Protect it with, if you've got a urethane stock or a varnish stock, some Johnson Bush's wax, or maybe some Carnauba wood wax. Exterior wax is good. That'll protect it from your face salts. And if you've got like as I say, a shotgun that has, an actual oiled finish, and you can tell it's an oil finish because, you can actually see the pores of the wood. It's not filled in. You can use a discrete amount of boiled linseed oil. Tung oil is an option. The only trouble with tung oil is it builds up a surface film, and that can be scratched just like varnish. Its one advantage is it's clear, whereas linseed oil over time will yellow, but that's its character, and everybody knows that. That's what lends to the aging of wood. Checkering on gun stocks. Always preserve it. Never, ever, ever varnish checkering. That's another, amateur mistake. Anything that you do where you're putting varnish on a stock, preserve the checkering by masking it carefully, and don't get it into even the edge of the checkering, because when they checker rifle stocks, typically, with the exception of some foreign manufacturers, I think CZ, they may checker theirs before they finish it, but most American gun makers and European gun makers will finish the stocks first with urethane or varnish, and then they will checker them afterwards. And then what they do is they brush in a little bit of oil into the checkering. There are many different methods out there, but that's typical. It's important to not do too much to a gun stock, because that's the first way to ruin its value very quickly. Gun dealers are very sensitive to all the things that degrade a gun from its original manufacturer. And anything that you do to it to change the gun from its original manufacturer basically drops its value tremendously. And what they do is, too, they look at a gun such as this one, or my 1964 vintage Model 336 Marlin, and they sit on the bench and they look at the overall picture. Does the wood match the age of the metal? And if they see that it doesn't, in other words, if the steel, this steel here, the bluing is a little bit thin. This was a gun that was taken afield a lot over the years, whereas the Marlin wasn't. And just handling this gun, the metal is not dark black blue like it was the day it was manufactured, and the stock matches that. It's not as pretty as the day it was manufactured. But if they see a brand new stock sitting on an old gun, they're not interested, because that's a gun that had been refinished. They'll tell you immediately, well, it's been refinished, so I'll give you this. I'll give you, $350. And why, I saw in the book it was worth $650. Well, it would have been worth $650 if you left it alone. So that's the story with gun stocks. If you have any synthetic stocks, be careful to mind the manufacturer's instructions about what you can do and what you can't do with them. Most of the synthetic applied skins that are used, that end up being, with camo, camouflage patterns of any kind, those are very, very delicate, and you have to be careful not to get any gun solvents near them. Most normal gun solvents will ruin those plastic finishes. So you have to separate the steel parts from the stock and keep them away if you're going to use any gun solvents at all that can get at those plastics. If you have, like a Ruger American, those so-called Tupperware stocks are they're pretty much impervious to everything. Again, just don't be too aggressive. I like to always turn guns upside down when I'm cleaning them, so that the solvents, any drips, will run out of the action, not down into the action where they collect. If you have fiberglass stocks, those are pretty impervious to most substances. So, but be very careful to read the manufacturer's warnings and any cautions they may have about whatever stock materials they use. And above all, I always see, every time I go into a used gun store, I'll see so many shotguns and rifles where, the pads have turned, they've turned to hideous, shiny, discolored yellowish, red pads and things like this that are, they look like they're all cracked and everything. And that's because people were always wiping the gun down with some sort of polishes or, oils or whatever, and that rubber has just gotten ruined. So you basically you've got an ugly gun pad, and very frequently they were amateurishly installed. Pachmeyer sold thousands and thousands upon thousands of Pachmeyer recoil pads that were put on by people who did it themselves, and they buffed off the toes square, or they have all kinds of weird things going on, but they don't look like they were installed by a factory person. So those are the things that enhance the ugliness of a gun, is to get any kind of substances, chemicals, or solvents on those pads. So stay away from those pads. If I were to apply any linseed oil to this stock, and as I say, just a drop, and one drop covers an entire acre of wood. That's all. You just leave a tiny bit on there and work it in with your hand. If you can't dry it with your hand while you're working at it for 15 minutes, you put far too much on. But before doing that, I'll remove this pad. And if I'm going to get anywhere beyond this checkering here and get into the hardware of the receiver, I'll take off this entire stock and work with it by itself, and be very careful not to get anywhere near these support surfaces here and damage them, because that's going to show up. So anyway, but what the most important thing is with gunwood and most stocks is, if you just leave them be and keep oil away from them, if you keep lubricating oil away from them, they'll last forever. And as I say, maybe a application of carnauba wax or something. I wouldn't use wax on a oiled finish. Just use oil. The oil doesn't need wax. So Benny's gone off with Mum. They've gone to the store, I guess, and gone shopping. And it's pouring out rain today, so I can't take them out and do any kind of bird hunting or anything. But I hope to be getting back to you very soon with regard to the M1A and the results that I've been able to accomplish with the glass bedding and the shimming of the gas system, and even the glass bedding of the rear sight. All those things that I've done to help improve its accuracy. We're going to see how that worked out. So to all my Patreon donors, thank you so much for your support and your kind words to all of you. And don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button right now, and the bell that goes along with it, so you'll know when I'm back. Thanks for watching. God bless.